The alarm bells echoed through the massive space station as red warning lights flashed in every corridor. Captain Lee Do-yeon stood in the crowded briefing room, watching the holographic display show dozens of red dots moving across the star map. Each dot represented a Vexstar warship, and they were spreading like a disease through 3 different sectors of space. "Gentlemen, ladies, and honored delegates," announced Admiral Reeves, his voice tight with worry. "The situation is worse than we first thought. The Vexstar Empire has launched coordinated attacks on 17 different worlds in the past 72 hours. We need every available ship and crew in space within the week." Lee looked around the room at the other species representatives. The tall, blue-skinned Altarians sat with their backs straight, confidence written on their faces. The insect-like Cathari clicked their mandibles in what he had learned was their version of agreement. The rocky-looking granite people simply nodded their heavy heads. Everyone seemed ready for war, everyone except the humans. "Captain Lee," Admiral Reeves continued, "as the senior human officer present, you will coordinate with Ambassador Kale of the Altarian Republic regarding your vessel assignment." Ambassador Kale stood up slowly. He was typical of his species, nearly 8 feet tall with pale blue skin and silver eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. When he spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "The human delegation will receive 1 frigate-class vessel," Kale said, not bothering to look directly at Lee. "Given your species' limited experience with interstellar warfare, we believe this is the most appropriate assignment." Lee felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Around the room, he could see other delegates trying not to smile. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Defense Council 5 years ago, and most species still saw them as the newcomers who barely knew how to fly between stars. "What class of frigate?" Lee asked. Kale waved his hand dismissively. "You will be briefed on the details at the shipyard. Report to Dock 17 in 6 hours." The meeting broke up quickly after that, with the other species representatives discussing their assault cruisers and battle carriers in excited voices. Lee walked out alone, his mind already working on the challenges ahead. 6 hours later, Lee stood on the observation deck of Dock 17 with his crew. Chief Engineer Park Minna was a small woman with grease permanently stained under her fingernails. From years of fixing mining equipment on the asteroid belts, she squinted at the ship through the transparent steel windows and shook her head. "Captain, that thing looks like it should have been scrapped 20 years ago," Lee had to agree. The frigate floating in the dock looked nothing like the sleek warships he had seen in the military databases. Its hull was a patchwork of different metals, welded together in places that suggested emergency repairs. Scorch marks covered most of the outer plating, and several sections had been completely replaced with metal that did not match the original color. "XK-47, said weapons specialist Dim Tai-ho, reading from his tablet. "Built 43 years ago by the Altarian Republic. Decommissioned twice, recommissioned once, and scheduled for permanent scrapping before being reassigned to human forces." Navigator Choi Ji-won pulled up the technical specifications on her portable display. "Captain, according to these numbers, this ship has a maximum range of 2.7 star systems before requiring major repairs. The plasma conduits are showing stress fractures and the navigation computer is running on backup power." Communications specialist Yang Soo-hee looked up from her own readings. "The communication array is 3 generations behind current standards. Half the frequencies this thing can broadcast are no longer used by modern fleets." Medical Officer Han Jin-ho was studying the life support specifications. "The environmental systems can support a crew of 12 for 6 months, assuming no major malfunctions." "There have been 14 major malfunctions in the past year," Lee looked at his crew. These 5 people had volunteered to serve with him when humanity was called to join the galactic war effort. Park Minna had given up a comfortable job maintaining asteroid mining stations. Kim Tai-ho had left his position training new pilots at the Earth Defense Academy. Choi Ji-won had been mapping new hyperspace routes for commercial shipping companies. Yang Soo-hee had been working on improving communication systems between Earth and the outer colonies. Han Jin-ho had been running a medical clinic on Mars. They had all given up good lives to be here, And this was what they got in return. "Sir," said an Altarian technician, approaching their group. "Are you the human crew for XK-47? "That's us," Lee replied. The technician handed him a data pad. "Sign here for transfer of command. The ship has been refueled and basic supplies have been loaded. You are scheduled to depart for the Outer Rim Patrol Route in 18 hours. Lee looked at the pad. The transfer document was written in the formal language of military bureaucracy, but the meaning was clear. The humans were being given the worst ship in the fleet and sent to the least important patrol route. They were expected to stay out of the way while the real military forces fought the actual war. "Where exactly is the Outer Rim Patrol Route?" Choi Ji-won asked. The technician looked uncomfortable. "Sector 7. It covers the abandoned mining colonies and empty star systems. Very quiet area, perfect for a new crew to gain experience." In other words, Lee thought, they were being sent where they could not cause any trouble or embarrass anyone if they failed. "Any particular orders regarding our patrol duties?" Lee asked. "Standard reconnaissance and reporting. If you encounter any Vexstar forces, you are to immediately report their position and withdraw to a safe distance." The technician paused, then added with barely hidden condescension, "The ship's weapon systems are functional, but I would not recommend engaging in combat unless absolutely necessary." After the technician left, the crew stood in silence for several minutes, staring at their new home. The XK-47 looked even worse up close. Through the observation windows, they could see technicians disconnecting power cables and removing the safety barriers that had kept the ship stable during refitting. "Well," Park Mina said finally, "I have seen worse." "When?" Kim Tae-ho asked. "Never, but I'm trying to be optimistic." Despite everything, Lee found himself smiling. "Let's go take a look at our flying coffin." They made their way down to the docking tube that connected to the ship's main airlock. As they walked through the corridors of the space station, Lee noticed other crews preparing for departure. The Altarian crews moved with precise efficiency, their advanced equipment gleaming under the bright lights. The Cathari crews clicked and buzzed in their complex language as they checked their sophisticated weapon systems. The Granite people spoke in low, rumbling voices about the heavy armor plating on their assault ships. Everyone looked ready for war. Everyone looked confident. When the airlock opened and they stepped aboard the XK-47, Lee felt like they had traveled backward in time. The corridors were narrow and cramped, lined with pipes and cables that should have been hidden behind wall panels. The lighting was dim and flickered occasionally. The air recycling system made a constant humming sound that suggested it was working harder than it should. "Home sweet home," Yang Soo-hee muttered. But as they explored their new ship, Lee began to notice things that the Altarian technicians had missed. The old-style plasma conduits were simple enough that they could be modified with basic tools. The navigation computer was outdated, but it was also completely unrestricted by modern safety protocols. The weapon systems were primitive, but they were also incredibly reliable and easy to repair. Most importantly, the ship was theirs. No oversight committees, no alien advisors, no bureaucrats looking over their shoulders. For the first time since joining the galactic community, humans had complete control over their own vessel. "Mina," Lee said, "how long would it take you to improve the power output on these plasma conduits?" She looked around the engine room, her eyes already calculating possibilities. "Give me 2 weeks and some spare parts from the supply depot. I can increase efficiency by at least 30%. Tae-ho, what about the weapon systems?" Kim Tae-ho was already studying the targeting computer. "The hardware is solid, but the software is ancient. I could write new targeting algorithms that would make this thing shoot like a ship twice its size." Lee nodded slowly. The galaxy had handed them a flying coffin and expected them to stay out of the way. But maybe, just maybe, they could turn this old ship into something that would surprise everyone, including themselves. 3 weeks had passed since the XK-47 left the space station, and the ship no longer looked like the same vessel. Captain Lee Do-yeon walked through corridors that hummed with new energy, past walls where fresh welding marks showed where his crew had been working around the clock. "Captain, you need to see this," Park Mina called from the engine room. Her voice carried excitement that had been missing when they first boarded the ship. Lee made his way to the engine compartment, stepping carefully around the tools and spare parts that covered nearly every surface. Park Mena stood beside the main plasma conduit, her hands covered in grease and her face lit up with pride. "Look at these power readings," she said, pointing to a display screen that showed numbers Lee had never seen before on their ship. "We are running at 140% of original specifications. Is that safe?" Lee asked, though he was impressed despite his concerns. Park Mena grinned. "Probably not. But I used techniques from the asteroid mining rigs. Those old ships had to push their systems beyond limits just to make profit. The plasma flows are more efficient now, and I reinforced the weak points with spare hull plating." She led him to a section of conduit that looked completely different from the original design. Instead of the smooth, curved pipes that Altarian engineers preferred, this section was angular and reinforced with metal strips welded in place. "The original design was too rigid," Park Mena explained. "When plasma pressure increased, the whole system would shut down to prevent damage. My modification lets the conduits flex and adapt to higher power levels. It is ugly, but it works." Lee nodded, understanding the implications. Their ship could now outrun vessels twice its size, and their weapons would have power levels that the enemy would not expect from an old frigate. "Captain to the bridge," Yang Sui's voice came through the communication system. "We have something interesting on the sensors." Lee made his way to the bridge, where Kim Tae-ho was staring at his weapons console with the intensity of a hunter watching prey. Choi Ji-won had multiple star charts open on her navigation display, while Yang Soo-hee listened to something through her headphones. "What do we have?" Lee asked. "Distress signal from a civilian transport," Yang Soo-hee replied. "The ship is called Mercy's Dream, carrying medical supplies to the colony on Kepler 7. They report engine failure and request immediate assistance." Choi Ji-won looked up from her charts. "Captain, they are in the Broken Belt asteroid field. That area is marked as dangerous for navigation, but my new route calculations show we can reach them." "How long to get there?" Lee asked. 47 minutes using the old hyperspace lanes. 12 minutes if we use the route I mapped through the asteroid field." Lee considered this. "Standard procedure would be to report the distress signal to Fleet Command and wait for a proper rescue ship. But that would take hours, and the ship with engine failure in an asteroid field might not have hours." "Take us through the field," Lee decided. As they dropped out of hyperspace near the Broken Belt, Lee immediately understood why the area was considered dangerous. Thousands of asteroids, some as large as city blocks, drifted in unpredictable patterns. The space between them was filled with smaller debris that could tear through a ship's hull like bullets. "There," Kim Tae-ho pointed to his tactical display. "The transport is caught between two large asteroids. But Captain, we have a bigger problem." On the main screen, Lee could see 3 ships surrounding the disabled transport. They were sleek and dark, with the angular design that marked them as Vexstar Raiders. "They are not trying to rescue anyone," Yang Soo-hee said grimly. "I intercepted their communications. They disabled the transport's engines and are preparing to board." Lee felt his crew looking at him, waiting for orders. Standard procedure was clear. They should withdraw immediately and report enemy contact to Fleet Command. The XK-47 was not designed for combat, especially not against 3 enemy ships, but the transport had over 200 civilians aboard, including medical personnel, heading to help a plague outbreak on Kepler 7. "Mena, how much power can you give me?" Lee asked. "Everything you need, Captain. These new modifications are hungry for a real test. Tae-ho, are your targeting improvements ready?" Kim Tae-ho's fingers danced over his console. "I have been tracking the enemy ships for the past 5 minutes. The new algorithms have calculated their movement patterns and identified weak points in their defensive systems. Gi-won, can you get us close without being detected?" Choi Ji-won was already plotting a course through the asteroid field. "I can bring us within weapons range using the asteroids for cover. The enemy will not see us coming until we are right on top of them," Lee took a deep breath. Everything his crew had been working on for the past 3 weeks was about to be tested. In actual combat. All right, people. Let's see what our flying coffin can really do. The XK-47 moved through the asteroid field like a fish swimming through coral reef. Choi Ji-won's new navigation techniques allowed them to slip between rocks that would have blocked larger ships, while Park Mina's power modifications kept their engines running silent and cool. The Vexstar Raiders never saw them coming. Kim Tae-ho's first shot disabled the lead Raiders' weapon systems with surgical precision. The second shot took out their engines. The third Raider turned to face this unexpected threat, but Kim Tae-ho's targeting computer had already calculated their response and placed shots exactly where they would be most effective. How are you doing that? Yang Soo-hee asked in amazement as she watched the weapons display. Gaming algorithms, Kim Tae-ho replied without taking his eyes off his console. I adapted predictive targeting software from Earth's combat simulation games. These programs were designed to anticipate human players, but they work even better against alien pilots who follow standard tactical doctrine. The third Vexstar ship tried to escape, but Park Mina's engine modifications allowed the XK-47 to catch up easily. Instead of destroying the fleeing Raider, Kim Tae-ho disabled their communication array and engines, leaving them stranded but alive. Transport vessel Mercy's Dream, this is Captain Lee of the XK-47, Yang Soo-hee broadcast. Are you in need of assistance? The response came immediately, filled with relief and gratitude. XK-47, this is Captain Rodriguez of Mercy's Dream. We have engine damage but no casualties. How did you get here so fast? We took a shortcut, Lee replied. Stand by for emergency repairs. While Han Jun-ho and a repair team transferred to the damaged transport, Yang Soo-hee intercepted enemy communications from the disabled Raiders. The conversations she picked up made her eyes widen with surprise. Captain, she said quietly, you need to hear this. She played back a recording of Vexstar voices speaking in their harsh, clicking language. The translation software rendered their words into basic English, unknown ship designation. Combat capabilities exceed database parameters. Tactical analysis inconclusive. Recommend immediate intelligence review. Ship configuration does not match known human vessel types. Weapons accuracy suggests advanced targeting systems. Engine performance indicates significant modifications. Priority. Message to Fleet Command. Human forces may have developed new technology. Recommend increased caution in future engagements. Lee listened to the recordings with growing amazement. The enemy was confused and concerned about their old, patched-together frigate. The XK-47 had gained a reputation before they even knew it. Sir, Kim Tae-ho said, I am reading more enemy contacts on long-range sensors. 3 more Raider groups, heading this way? Lee made a quick decision. Ji-won, plot a course out of the asteroid field. We have accomplished our mission. As they escorted the repaired transport to safety, Yang Soo-hee continued monitoring enemy communications. The Vexstar commanders were calling their ship the Ghost vessel because of its ability to appear and disappear through the asteroid field. Captain, Park Mina said over the intercom, the engine modifications performed better than expected. We can maintain this power level indefinitely. The targeting systems worked perfectly, Kim Tae-ho added. We achieved 96% accuracy against moving targets in a debris field. Navigation through the asteroid field was smooth, Choi Ji-won reported. I have mapped 17 new routes that larger ships cannot use. Lee looked around his bridge at the crew that had transformed a flying coffin into something the enemy actually feared. They had taken the worst ship in the fleet and made it into a weapon that could outfight, outrun, and outmaneuver vessels designed by species with centuries more experience in space warfare. Yang Soo-hee, send a report to Fleet Command, Lee ordered. Tell them we rescued Mercy's Dream and engaged 3 enemy raiders, all objectives completed successfully. He did not mention the modifications they had made or the new tactics they had developed. Let the Fleet Command think this was just a routine patrol mission. Meanwhile, the XK-47 would continue to patrol the Outer Rim, learning and adapting and becoming something that nobody expected, something that would soon become a legend. The emergency beacon reached the XK-47 while they were patrolling the outer edge of their assigned sector. Captain Lee Do-yun read the message twice before he could believe what it said. All available ships were ordered to report immediately to the Kepler Junction for what Fleet Command was calling a critical defensive action. "Captain," Yang Suhi said from her communications station, "I am receiving priority broadcasts from Admiral Voss of the Altarian Fleet. The entire Vexstar battle group is moving toward the core worlds. Over 300 enemy ships." Lee felt his stomach drop. 300 ships was more than the entire Galactic Defense Council fleet could handle, even with all their advanced technology. The Kepler Junction was the gateway to the most populated systems in the galaxy. If it fell, billions of people would be defenseless. How long to reach the junction? Lee asked. Navigator Choi Ji-won was already calculating their route. 18 hours using standard hyperspace lanes. "But Captain, I have been working on something new. I think I can get us there in 12 hours. "What kind of something new?" Choi Ji-won pulled up a three-dimensional star chart that showed a route unlike anything Lee had ever seen. Instead of the smooth curves that ships normally followed through hyperspace, this path twisted and turned through areas that were marked in red on all official navigation charts. "Hyperspace storm channels," she explained. "Most ships avoid them because the gravitational forces are too dangerous. But our hull modifications make us more flexible than standard vessels. We can ride the storm currents like a surfboard rides a wave." Chief Engineer Park Mino looked at the route with professional interest. "The plasma conduits can handle the power fluctuations, but the ride will be rough." "Do it," Lee decided. "If we are going to help, we need to get there as fast as possible." The journey through the hyperspace storm channels was unlike anything the crew had experienced. The ship twisted and bucked like a wild animal as gravitational forces pulled them in different directions. Emergency lights flashed constantly, and the hull made groaning sounds that suggested it was being stretched to its limits, but Park Mina's modifications held. The flexible conduits that she had installed adapted to the changing power demands, while the reinforced hull plating flexed instead of cracking under the stress. When they dropped out of hyperspace at the Kepler Junction, the sight that greeted them was both magnificent and terrifying. Over 200 Allied ships hung in space in perfect battle formation. Altarian cruisers gleamed like silver needles, their weapon systems charged and ready. Cathari battleships bristled with missile pods and energy cannons. The massive dreadnoughts of the Granite People looked like flying mountains of armor and guns. And facing them across the junction was the largest fleet of enemy ships that anyone had ever seen. "XK-47, this is Admiral Voss," came the transmission from the flagship. "Report to Grid 7 for rear guard assignment. You will provide cover for the supply ships." Lee looked at his tactical display. Grid 7 was at the very back of the Allied formation, as far from the actual fighting as possible. Once again, the humans were being kept out of the way. "Acknowledged, Admiral," Lee replied, though his jaw was tight with frustration. The battle began 2 hours later with a massive exchange of long-range fire. The space between the two fleets lit up with energy beams and missile trails as hundreds of ships engaged each other across millions of kilometers. At first, it looked like the Allied forces might hold. The Altarian ships were faster and more maneuverable than the Vexstar vessels, while the Granite People's heavy armor absorbed tremendous punishment without failing. The Cathari used swarm tactics that confused and overwhelmed individual enemy ships. But the Vexstar had numbers on their side. For every enemy ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. Slowly but steadily, the Allied battle line began to bend backward under the pressure. "Captain," Kim Tai-ho reported from his weapons station, "the center of our formation is collapsing. Admiral Voss's flagship is taking heavy damage." On the main screen, Lee could see the pride of the Altarian fleet. A massive battle cruiser that had seemed invincible just hours before, listing to one side with fires burning along its hull. Other ships were falling back, their formations breaking apart as they tried to avoid being overwhelmed. "Sir," Yang Suhi said urgently, "I am intercepting enemy communications. They are preparing to break through our center and attack the civilian evacuation ships behind us." Li watched the tactical display as the situation grew worse by the minute. In 15 minutes, maybe 20, the Vexstar fleet would punch through the Allied defenses and reach the refugee ships that were carrying millions of people away from the combat zone. "Ji-wan," Li said quietly, "can you plot a course through the battle zone to the enemy flagship?" Choi Ji-wan looked at him with wide eyes. "Captain, that would mean flying directly through the heaviest fighting. The flagship is surrounded by escort vessels and defensive positions. Can you do it?" She studied her navigation display for several long moments. "The debris from destroyed ships is creating a cloud near the center of the battle. I could use it for cover, but we would have to get very close to enemy vessels. One mistake, and we would be vaporized. Minna, can our systems handle a full power attack run?" Park Mina checked her engineering displays. "The modifications are holding well. I can give you everything the ship has, but Captain, we are not designed for assault missions." "Taiho, what about their flagship? Any weaknesses?" Kim Taiho had been studying the massive Vexstar command ship through his targeting scope. "It is heavily armored, but I noticed something interesting. The reactor housing has a different heat signature than the rest of the ship. It might be a weak point, but I would need to be at point-blank range to target it accurately." Li looked around his bridge at the 5 people who had followed him into this war. They had already exceeded every expectation, turned their flying Coffin into something that could fight and win. Now he was asking them to attempt something that would probably kill them all. "We are not going to sit back and watch millions of people die," Li said. "Not when we might be able to do something about it." "Sir," Han Zheno spoke up from his medical station, "if we are going to try this, we should do it now. The civilian ships are almost within enemy weapons range." Li took a deep breath. "All hands, prepare for combat. We are leaving formation." The XK-47 broke away from the rear guard position and accelerated toward the center of the battle. Almost immediately, Yang Sui's communication board lit up with incoming messages. "XK-47, return to assigned position immediately," Admiral Voss's voice crackled through the speakers. "XK-47, you are not authorized for assault operations," came another transmission from Fleet Command. Li reached over and switched off the communication system. "Sorry, Admiral, we seem to be having technical difficulties." Choi Ji-wan guided the ship through the debris field with skill that amazed everyone on the bridge. Pieces of destroyed vessels, some as large as shuttlecraft, drifted past their viewports. As she found paths through the wreckage that larger ships could never follow, enemy fire began to target them as they got closer to the Vexstar flagship. Park Mina's flexible hull design proved its worth as energy beams that would have punched through rigid armor instead caused the ship to flex and absorb the impacts. 30 seconds to target," Choi Ji-wan announced. "All power to forward shields." Li ordered. "Weapons charged and ready," Kim Taiho reported. "I have a lock on the reactor housing." The final approach seemed to take forever. The Vexstar flagship grew larger and larger on their screen until it filled their entire view. Point defense weapons fired at them constantly, creating a web of deadly energy that Park Mina's shields barely managed to deflect. "Now!" Li shouted. Kim Taiho fired every weapon the XK-47 had directly into the weak point he had identified in the enemy flagship's reactor housing. The concentrated fire from their modified weapon systems, powered by Park Mina's improved engines, struck with the force of a ship 3 times their size. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a brilliant flash of light erupted from the Vexstar flagship as its reactor core went critical. The massive ship began to break apart from the inside, secondary explosions tearing through its hull as power systems overloaded throughout the vessel. The destruction of the flagship created a shockwave that rippled through the enemy formation. Ships that had been advancing confidently suddenly found themselves without central command, their coordinated attack dissolving into confusion. All Allied vessels, Yang Suhi broadcast on all frequencies. The enemy flagship's reactor housing is located at coordinates transmitted with this message. Target that location for maximum damage. The information spread through the Allied fleet like wildfire. Within minutes, every ship was targeting the weak points that the XK-47 had discovered. The tide of battle turned as enemy vessels began exploding one after another, their own reactor cores failing under precise attacks. What had looked like certain defeat became an unexpected victory as the Vexstar fleet broke apart and retreated, leaving the Kepler Junction secure and the civilian evacuation ships safe. "Captain," Yang Suhi said with wonder in her voice, "Admiral Voss is requesting permission to come aboard. He wants to personally thank the crew that saved the fleet." Li looked around his bridge at the people who had just accomplished the impossible. They had taken their flying coffin into the heart of the largest space battle in galactic history and emerged victorious. "Tell the Admiral he is welcome anytime," Li replied. "But first, let's make sure our ship is still in one piece." As they began damage assessments and repairs, Li realized that everything had changed. The XK-47 was no longer just an old frigate with creative modifications. It had become something that would be remembered long after all of them were gone. It had become a legend. 2 months after the victory at Kepler Junction, Captain Lee Do-yeon stood in a briefing room that looked very different from the one where he had first received his assignment. This time, he was not sitting in the back with the other species looking down on humanity. This time, he was at the front of the room and everyone was listening. "The tactical data from the battle shows something remarkable," Admiral Voss said, projecting holographic displays for the assembled officers. "The modifications made by the human crew increased their ship's effectiveness by over 300%. Li watched as dozens of alien faces studied the technical specifications that Park Mina had developed. Altarian engineers took notes on her flexible conduit designs. Cathari weapons specialists examined Kim Taiho's targeting algorithms. Even the usually silent Granite people asked questions about the hull reinforcement techniques, but Li noticed something troubling in the official reports. The victory at Kepler Junction was being credited to Admiral Voss's tactical brilliance and advanced Altarian battle coordination. The XK-47 was mentioned only as a supporting vessel that provided valuable reconnaissance data. "Captain Lee," Admiral Voss continued, "you and your crew have been selected to establish a new training program. You will teach other crews how to implement similar modifications to their vessels." After the briefing, Lee walked back to his ship with mixed feelings. Recognition was good, but he wondered if the bureaucrats truly understood what his crew had accomplished. They seemed to think the modifications were just simple technical improvements, not the fundamental change in thinking that had made them possible. "Captain," Yang Suhi called as he entered the XK-47, "we have visitors." In the main corridor, Li found 3 young officers waiting for him. One was human, one was Altarian, and one belonged to a species he had never seen before, with green skin and large, curious eyes. "Sir," the human officer said, stepping forward, "I am Lieutenant Park Dong-soo. These are Lieutenant Veltar of the Altarian Republic and Lieutenant Zixena of the Kelleran Union. We volunteered for your training program." Li studied the 3 young faces. They all had the same eager expression he remembered seeing on his own crew when they first boarded the XK-47. "Why did you volunteer?" Li asked. Lieutenant Veltar answered first. "Because the old ways of thinking are not working. My people have built the same types of ships for centuries, but we never considered that there might be better approaches." Lieutenant Zixa nodded agreement. "The Kelleran Union has always focused on defensive strategies, but watching your ship fight showed us that attack and defense can be combined in ways we never imagined." Lieutenant Park Dong-soo grinned. "And, I want to learn how to turn junk into something that can save the galaxy." Over the following weeks, the XK-47 became the center of an unusual experiment. The 3 volunteer officers worked alongside Lee's crew, learning not just the technical modifications but the thinking behind them. Park Mena taught them that every problem was an opportunity to find a creative solution. Kim Taiho showed them how to combine technologies from different sources in ways that no one had tried before, but the most important lesson was harder to explain. It was the idea that following the rules was less important than achieving the mission. Traditional military doctrine says that a frigate should never engage a battleship, Lee explained to his students during one training session. But traditional military doctrine assumes that all frigates are the same. What happens when you have a frigate that thinks like a fighter but hits like a cruiser? You win battles that everyone says are impossible, Lieutenant Park Dong-soo replied. Meanwhile, Yang Soo-hee continued monitoring enemy communications, and what she discovered was both encouraging and disturbing. The Vexstar were changing their entire military strategy because of the XK-47, Captain, she reported during one of their weekly briefings. The enemy is developing new ship designs specifically to counter human tactics. They are calling it Project Ghost Hunter. Lee studied the intercepted communications on Yang Soo-hee's screen. The Vexstar military was pouring resources into creating vessels that could adapt to unpredictable tactics and unconventional attacks. They are scared, Kim Tae-ho said with satisfaction. Good. But Medical Officer Han Jun-ho had been studying the psychological profiles of the mixed-species crews they were training, and his findings were even more interesting than the enemy's fear. Captain, he said, presenting his data to the crew, crews with members from different species perform significantly better than single-species crews. The Altarians contribute precision and technical knowledge. The humans provide creativity and adaptability. The Kelleran adds strategic thinking and patience. When you combine these different approaches, you get capabilities that none of the species have individually. This discovery was spreading through the fleet faster than any official directive. Captains were quietly requesting transfers for alien crew members. Engineering teams were forming with members from 3 or 4 different species. The rigid hierarchy that had always separated the galactic community was beginning to break down. Sir, Choi Jawan said during one navigation lesson with the new students, I have mapped over 50 hyperspace routes that only modified ships can use. If other vessels adopt similar modifications, we could cut travel time between star systems by 30%. The implications were enormous. Trade, communication, and military response times could all be improved dramatically. But it would require ships designed with flexibility rather than standardization. 6 months after Kepler Junction, Lee received new orders that surprised him. Instead of continuing the training program, he was being assigned to lead a special task force of modified vessels. The mission was classified, but the ship assignments told him everything he needed to know: 12 vessels, each crewed by mixed-species teams, each modified using techniques developed from the XK-47's innovations. The ships looked like nothing in any military manual, with hull modifications, weapon upgrades, and engine improvements that would have horrified traditional engineers. Captain, Park Mina said as she examined the technical specifications for their new task force, these ships are even more modified than we are. Some of these designs are completely insane. Good insane or bad insane? Lee asked. Definitely good insane. Look at this one. She showed him plans for a ship that combined Altarian energy weapons with human targeting systems and Kelleran defensive shields. It should not work according to every engineering principle I know, but I think it will work better than anything anyone has ever built. The task force assembled at a secret base in the Outer Rim, far from the bureaucrats and admirals who still believed that wars were won with superior technology rather than superior thinking. Lee looked at the 12 ships floating in the hangar and felt the same pride he had experienced when his crew first made the XK-47 into something special. But this time, they were not alone. This time, they had allies who understood that the best weapon against a superior enemy was not a bigger gun, but a more creative mind. All ships, this is Captain Lee, he broadcast to the task force. We have new orders. Intelligence reports indicate that the Vexstar are preparing to deploy their new hunter-killer squadrons. Our mission is to find these units and neutralize them before they can be used against the main fleet. Sir, came a response from one of the other captains, our ships are not exactly standard military vessels. What if we encounter forces we cannot handle? Lee smiled as he looked at the XK-47's bridge, where his original crew worked alongside their alien students who had become trusted colleagues. Then we will do what we always do, he replied. We will figure out how to turn our disadvantages into advantages, and we will win battles that everyone says are impossible. As the task force prepared to depart on their new mission, Lee realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The rigid separation between species was giving way to cooperation based on mutual respect and shared innovation. The old idea that some species were naturally superior to others was being replaced by the understanding that diversity was strength. The XK-47 had started as a flying coffin that nobody wanted. Now it was the template for a new kind of military force, one that valued creativity over conformity and results over regulations. The legend was spreading, and there was no stopping it now. The hunter-killer squadron appeared on their sensors like ghosts materializing from the void. Captain Lee Do-yeon studied the tactical display with growing concern as three sleek Vexstar vessels emerged from hyperspace directly ahead of their convoy. These are not standard raider ships, Kim Tae-ho reported from his weapons station. The hull configuration is completely new. I am reading weapon systems that do not match anything in our database. Lee watched as the enemy ships moved with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. They did not attack immediately, instead circling the human task force like predators studying their prey. Captain, Yang Soo-hee said urgently, I am detecting scanning beams. They are analyzing our ship modifications in real time. This was exactly what intelligence had warned them about. The Vexstar had built these hunter-killers specifically to counter human tactics. Every creative modification that had made the XK-47 legendary was now being turned against them. All ships, evasive maneuvers, Lee ordered. Do not engage until we understand their capabilities. But as the task force began to scatter, the hunter-killers demonstrated abilities that made Lee's blood run cold. When the modified cruiser Sharp Edge tried to use its enhanced speed to escape, one of the enemy ships matched its acceleration perfectly. When the hybrid destroyer New Dawn attempted to hide in an asteroid field using Choi Yuan's navigation techniques, another hunter-killer followed it through the exact same route. Sir, came a transmission from Captain Yuan of the Sharp Edge, they are anticipating our moves. It is like they know what we are going to do before we do it. The battle began when the New Dawn tried to use Kim Tae-ho's targeting algorithms to disable one of the hunter-killers. The precise shots that had worked so well against standard Vexstar ships were deflected by adaptive shields that shifted frequency faster than the targeting computer could compensate. They have been studying our tactics, Lee realized. Every innovation we developed, every modification we made, they have found ways to counter it. The fight that followed was unlike anything Lee had experienced. The hunter-killers seemed to learn from each exchange, adapting their strategies in real time. When Park Mina increased power to the engines, the enemy ships adjusted their formation to account for the XK-47's new speed. When Kim Tae-ho switched to manual targeting to confuse their prediction systems, the hunter-killers began using random evasion patterns. Captain, Park Mina called from the engine room, they are jamming our plasma conduits somehow. The flexible modifications are being forced back to rigid configurations. Lee felt a chill of recognition. The enemy was not just countering their tactics, they were undoing the very modifications that made their ships special. All ships, fall back to Rally Point 7, Lee ordered. We need to regroup and analyze their capabilities. The retreat was painful but necessary. 3 of their 12 ships had suffered serious damage, and 2 more were operating on backup systems. Worse, the crew's confidence was shaken. For the first time since the XK-47 had become legend, human ingenuity was not enough. At Rally Point 7, a hidden base in an abandoned star system, Lee called together all the task force captains for an emergency meeting. The holographic conference room was filled with grim faces as they reviewed the battle data. The hunter-killers are equipped with adaptive learning systems, reported Captain Singh of the technical analysis team. They record everything we do. and immediately develop countermeasures. Our greatest strength, our ability to improvise, has become our greatest weakness. What about new modifications? Suggested Captain Petrova of the Night Runner. If we change our ship configurations, maybe we can stay ahead of their adaptation cycles. Lee shook his head. They adapt faster than we can modify? By the time we implement new changes, they will have already figured out how to counter them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Vexstar had found a way to neutralize the human advantage. Worse, intelligence reports suggested that there were dozens of these hunter-killer squadrons being deployed throughout the galaxy. Sir, young Suhi said quietly, I have been monitoring enemy communications. They are calling this Project Evolution. The hunter-killers are not just meant to defeat us, they are designed to learn from us and then teach those lessons to the entire Vexstar fleet. Lee felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The innovations that had made them heroes were now being used to make the enemy stronger. Every battle they fought would make the Vexstar more effective against other human forces. 3 days later, while the task force was still analyzing the hunter-killer data, Yang Suhi intercepted a transmission that changed everything. Captain, she said, her voice tight with worry, the Vexstar are preparing to deploy a superweapon. Something they call the adaptation engine. If the intelligence is accurate, it is designed to analyze and counter every tactical innovation developed by any species in the galaxy. Lee studied the intercepted data with growing alarm. The adaptation engine was not just a weapon, it was a strategic game-changer. If the Vexstar could instantly counter any new tactic or technology, they would become effectively unbeatable. How long before it becomes operational? Lee asked. According to these communications, 3 weeks. Maybe. Less. Lee looked around his ship at the crew that had started this journey with him. Park Mena was working frantically to develop new modifications that might stay ahead of the hunter-killers. Kim Taiho was testing targeting systems that operated on principles completely different from anything they had used before. Choi Ji-won was mapping hyperspace routes through areas so dangerous that even the hunter-killers might not be able to follow, but medical officer Han Jin-ho had been studying the psychological impact of their recent defeat, and his findings were deeply troubling. Captain, he reported during their next crew meeting, the failure against the hunter-killers is affecting morale throughout the fleet. Many crews are questioning whether human tactics are still viable. Some are requesting transfers back to standard vessels and conventional strategies. Lee understood the problem. The legend of the XK-47 had inspired thousands of people to believe that creativity and determination could overcome any obstacle. Now that legend was being challenged, and the doubt was spreading faster than the confidence had. Sir, Choi Ji-won said hesitantly, I have been analyzing the location of the adaptation engine. It is in the heart of Vexstar territory, surrounded by their most heavily defended systems. A direct assault would be suicide. What about an indirect approach? Park Mena suggested. Maybe we could disable it without engaging their main defenses. Kim Taiho shook his head. The intelligence reports show that the facility is buried deep underground on a heavily fortified planet. Even if we could reach it, we would need massive firepower to penetrate their defenses. Lee stared at the tactical displays showing the Vexstar Fortress world where the adaptation engine was being prepared. Every strategic analysis suggested that attacking it was impossible. The defenses were too strong, the distance too great, the risk too high up. But Leah remembered standing in a briefing room months ago, looking at a decrepit frigate that everyone said was worthless. He remembered watching his crew transform that flying coffin into something that could accomplish the impossible. We are not going to attack their fortress, Lee said finally. We are going to do something they will never expect. What's that, sir? Yang Su-hee asked. Lee looked at his crew, the people who had followed him from being outcasts to becoming legends. We are going to sacrifice ourselves to save the galaxy. The plan that Lee outlined was so dangerous that it barely qualified as a plan at all. It involved using the XK-47 as a massive electromagnetic pulse device. converting every system on the ship into a single-use weapon that could disable the adaptation engine, but the pulse would destroy the ship and everyone aboard it. Captain, Han Junho said quietly, "Are we really going to vote on whether to commit suicide?" "No," Lee replied. "We are going to vote on whether the galaxy is worth saving." The vote was unanimous. As they prepared for what would likely be their final mission, Lee received a message from Admiral Voss that surprised him. "Captain Lee, intelligence has learned of your intended mission. I am ordering you to abandon this plan immediately. The risk is too great, and the probability of success is too low." Lee looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. "Yasuhi, are we having communication problems again?" he asked. She smiled. Grimly, "Yes, sir. Terrible technical difficulties? Completely unrepairable." As the XK-47 prepared to depart for Vexstar territory, Lee realized that they had come full circle. Once again, they were defying orders and attempting something that everyone said was impossible. But this time, the stakes were not just their own lives or even the lives of civilians on a single world. This time, they were fighting for the future of every free species in the galaxy. The Vexstar home system was a fortress of metal and fire. Captain Lee Do-yun watched through the XK-47's viewports as they approached the most heavily defended star system in known space. Orbital platforms bristling with weapons surrounded every planet. Patrol fleets moved in perfect formations through the void. Warning beacons transmitted threats in a dozen languages, but they were not alone. "Captain," Yang Suhi reported from her communications station, "I am receiving signals from 47 ships. The entire task force followed us." Lee felt his throat tighten with emotion. Every captain in their mixed-species fleet had chosen to join what was supposed to be a suicide mission. Ships with human creativity, Altarian precision, Cathari courage, and Granite people determination had abandoned their official orders to be here. "This is Captain Singh of the Stormwalker," came a transmission. "Sir, we could not let you do this alone. Captain Petrova of the Night Runner here. If this is the end, we want to face it together." One by one, every ship in the task force checked in. Lee looked around his bridge at the original crew of the XK-47, the people who had started this journey with him when they were given the worst ship in the fleet. "Well," Park Mina said with a grin that did not quite hide her fear, "at least we'll have company." The assault began at the outer edge of the system, where automated defense platforms detected their approach and opened fire. But the attacking fleet moved like nothing the Vexstar had ever encountered. Human unpredictability combined with alien precision, creating formations that shifted and flowed like living things. "Remember," Lee broadcast to all ships, "we are not trying to win a conventional battle. We just need to reach the planet's surface." The modified ships used every trick their crews had learned. Choi Ji-won's hyperspace routes allowed them to appear inside the defense perimeter. Kim Taeho's targeting algorithms, now adapted by dozens of weapons officers, found weak points in enemy formations. Park Mina's engineering innovations, copied and improved by engineers from 6 different species, kept damaged ships operational long past their breaking points, but the real advantage was something the Vexstar could not have predicted. The mixed crews had learned to think together in ways that transcended individual species limitations. When human creativity hit a wall, Altarian logic found a solution. When Altarian precision was not enough, Granite people's stubbornness pushed through. When conventional tactics failed, Cathari adaptability created new approaches. "Sir," Kim Taeho called out, "the hunter-killer squadrons are responding." 12 ships, approaching from 3 vectors. Lee watched the tactical display as the specially designed enemy vessels moved to intercept them. These were the ships that had defeated them before, the adaptive predators that learned from every encounter, but this time was different. "All ships," Lee announced, "implement Protocol Chaos." Protocol Chaos was something they had developed during the journey to Vexstar space. Instead of using their most effective tactics, every ship would use completely random strategies. No patterns, no logic, no consistency. Pure improvisation that could not be predicted or countered. The hunter-killers, designed to adapt to rational tactics, found themselves facing opponents who were not being rational at all. Ships that should have used their speed to escape instead turned to fight. Vessels that should have coordinated their attacks instead scattered in all directions. Crews that should have followed military doctrine instead made decisions based on instinct and creativity. It was chaos, but it was effective chaos. Target planet surface, Lee ordered as they broke through the orbital defenses. All ships prepare for atmospheric entry. The final descent was a nightmare of fire and metal. Anti-aircraft weapons filled the sky with deadly energy while fighter squadrons swarmed around the attacking ships. But Park-Mina's hull modifications proved their worth one last time, flexing and adapting to damage that would have destroyed conventional vessels. "Captain," she called from the engine room, "I have finished the conversion. Every system on the ship is now connected to the electromagnetic pulse generator. When we activate it, the XK-47 will become the largest EMP device ever created." Lee looked at the tactical display showing the underground facility that housed the adaptation engine. Intelligence had been correct about the defenses. The facility was buried under kilometers of rock and metal, protected by shields that could withstand orbital bombardment, but it was not protected against what they were about to do. "All ships, this is Captain Lee," he broadcast on all frequencies. "We are beginning the final phase. Thank you for following us this far." The XK-47 landed hard on the planet's surface, its hull cracked and systems failing. Around them, the other ships of the task force were taking positions in a rough circle, their own crews preparing for the end. But as Park-Mina began the final preparations for the electromagnetic pulse, something unexpected happened. "Captain," Yang Su-hee said with wonder in her voice, "I am reading resonance patterns from the other ships. Their power systems are synchronizing with ours." Lee looked at the sensor readings with amazement. The diverse technologies of the mixed fleet, human innovations combined with alien engineering, were creating a harmonic effect that none of them had anticipated. "Sir," Kim Tae-ho reported, "the targeting computers are showing amplification factors I have never seen before. The combined pulse will be 50 times stronger than we calculated." "All crews," Lee announced, "prepare for electromagnetic pulse activation in 30 seconds. He looked around his bridge one last time at the people who had made the impossible possible. Park-Mina stood ready at her engineering controls, her face calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. Kim Tae-ho had his weapon systems primed for the pulse release. Choi Ji-won was monitoring navigation systems that would guide the energy directly to the target. Yang Su-hee was coordinating with the other ships, ensuring perfect timing. Han Jun-ho was ready to provide medical support for whatever came next. 10 seconds, Lee announced. 5 seconds. Activate. The electromagnetic pulse that erupted from the combined task force was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Energy that should have destroyed every ship in the fleet instead flowed between them, amplified by the resonance effect of their diverse technologies. The pulse penetrated through kilometers of rock and metal, reached the adaptation engine facility, and disabled every electronic system in the underground complex. But instead of dying in the explosion they had expected, the crews found themselves still alive. The harmonic effect had not only amplified the pulse, it had protected them from its destructive force. "Captain," Park-Mina called from the engine room, "all systems are still operational." The resonance pattern created a protective field around our ships. Lee stared at the readings in disbelief. They had succeeded in destroying the adaptation engine, but they had survived to see the victory. "All ships report status," he ordered. One by one, the task force captains checked in, damaged but operational, battered but victorious, alive against all odds. "Sir," Yang Su-hee said quietly, "I am receiving transmissions from Vexstar Command. The adaptation engine is completely destroyed. They are requesting terms for a ceasefire." 2 years later, Captain Lee Do-yeon stood in a briefing room that was very different from any he had seen before. The seats were arranged in a circle rather than rows, and they were filled with representatives from over 20 different species. Human officers sat next to Altarian scientists. Cathari engineers worked alongside Granite People tacticians. Former enemies from the Vexstar Empire participated as equals in planning peaceful exploration missions. "The first ships of the new Galactic Innovation Corps are ready for launch," announced Admiral Chun, the human officer who had replaced Admiral Voss as fleet commander. "These vessels represent the combined knowledge and creativity of every species in the Alliance." Lee looked at the technical specifications for the new ships. They were beautiful in their imperfection, combining technologies and design philosophies from dozens of different worlds. No two ships were exactly alike, but all of them shared the same principle that had made the XK-47 legendary. They were built to exceed expectations. "Captain Lee," Admiral Chun continued, "you and your crew are being offered command of the exploration vessel New Horizons. Your mission will be to seek out new species and establish peaceful contact using the diplomatic protocols we have developed." Lee looked at his original crew, the 5 people who had followed him from being outcasts to becoming legends. Park Mena was now Chief of Engineering for the entire Innovation Corps. Kim Taiho had become the lead instructor for the new Tactical Academy. Choi Ji-won was mapping hyperspace routes that would connect distant galaxies. Yang Soo-hee was developing communication protocols for species they had not yet met. Han Jun-ho was studying the medical needs of the growing galactic community. They had all been offered prestigious positions throughout the Alliance, but they had chosen to stay together. "We accept the assignment," Lee replied as they prepared to board the New Horizons. Lee took one last look at the XK-47. The old frigate was being preserved as a monument, a reminder of what could be accomplished when people refused to accept limitations. A plaque beside the ship read, "They handed us a flying coffin. We made it a legend." Below that, in smaller text, was a quote that had become the motto of the Innovation Corps: "The greatest victories are won not by superior equipment, but by superior imagination." The New Horizons was everything the XK-47 had never been. Fast, modern, equipped with the latest technology from every member species of the Alliance. But as Lee walked through its corridors, he realized that the most important thing had not changed. The ship was crewed by people who believed that any challenge could be overcome with enough creativity and determination. In the hangar bay, he found a group of young officers from different species working together to modify a shuttle using techniques that would have horrified their instructors. When they saw him watching, they straightened up nervously. "Captain," one of them said, "we were just trying to improve the fuel efficiency." Lee smiled. "Carry on. Just remember to document everything you do. The next crew that gets handed a flying coffin might need to know how to turn it into something legendary." As the New Horizons departed for unknown space, Lee reflected on how much had changed since that first day when Ambassador Kale had dismissed humanity as too primitive for real military service. The galaxy had learned that advancement was not about having the best technology, but about having the best ideas. And the best ideas they had discovered came from the most unexpected places. Behind them, the XK-47 remained in its place of honor, a symbol of the truth that had changed everything. With enough imagination and determination, anyone could exceed all expectations. The legend lived on, not in the ship itself, but in every person who refused to accept that something was impossible. And in the vast darkness of space, there were always new impossibilities waiting to be conquered.